As ISIS and al-Qaeda continue to terrorize the Western world, and this latest example of these teenage boys is one of the most heinous that we have seen. So what will it take to get the president to call this what many believe it is, and that's Islamic extremism?
What this White House is very clear about is that the world is not at war with Islam.
We are in a war on terror.
I'm upset that the president is not actually saying this is a war that the Islamic extremists are posing against the United States.
It's part of the denial.
They've gone through such verbal gymnastics to avoid saying this obvious phrase, radical Islam.
So will we hear those words tonight in the same phrase, Islamic extremism, from the president this evening? Senator Rob Portman joins us. You know, the administration would argue in this, Senator, and welcome, good to have you here tonight, that they have said quite clearly that they are battling a violent extremist group that is pushing an extreme version of Islam, and that this is not about the Islamic religion itself. Do you agree?
Well, yeah, I think they're getting there slowly but surely. We're fighting an ideology. It's not against deranged individuals. It's against an ideology, and it is radical Islam, and it is Islamic extremism. And it has been amazing that the administration has not been willing or able to acknowledge that. I think it goes to this broader issue where they haven't been able to acknowledge the real threat that exists in the homeland, but also the increasingly serious problem we see not just in the Middle East, but in the Horn of Africa, and unfortunately in other places in the world. So this is part of a denial by this administration, and I hope the president doesn't say tonight that we somehow are making progress against ISIS, because that's not the reality. We need to tell the American people what's really going on.
I mean, we know that in the speech he plans to say that they are stopping ISIL's advance. Instead of getting dragged into another ground war in the Middle East, we are leading a broad coalition, is what the president is expected to say this evening. I want to just draw your attention to some comments from David Cameron and from President Obama earlier this week as they talked about all of this. And there's a very different tenor in the way that the two men approached it. President Obama says, and so, you know, this is a problem that causes great heartache and tragedy and destruction, but it is one that ultimately we are going to defeat. David Cameron says, we do face a very serious Islamist extremist terrorist threat in Europe, in America, and across the world, and we have to be incredibly vigilant in terms of that threat. I mean, it feels like this ought to be the headline in the speech tonight in terms of foreign policy, the seriousness of this threat and what we're doing to counter it.
Yeah, I agree, and we've certainly seen it. We've seen it, unfortunately, in Paris recently and in the Middle East, but also even closer here in the homeland. Recently, in my hometown of Cincinnati, there was an individual who was apprehended, who was a jihadist. And what's interesting to me, Martha, is the Muslim community in the United States, and for that matter, much of the Muslim community around the world, is acknowledging this. In other words, they're not trying to hide from it. They are saying there is an extremism and a radical Islam element that we need to address. And they're being very forthright about it and talking about the importance of dealing with it. So certainly the administration should be, as Prime Minister Cameron did.
So the president, according to what we learned about the speech so far, will call for Congress to authorize the fight against ISIL. Do you see any issue, any problem with that?
I think it's a good idea. I think we should have a better strategy with regard to ISIS in general. I see a failed strategy now, if there is one. And I think by going to the Congress and asking for the authority to use force instead of relying on the previous authorities that had nothing to do with what's happening today, I think we can have that debate and that discussion. We'll end up with a better strategy. Congress ought to have a role in this also, because we are making a further commitment, and we have to. ISIS now has about 1/3 of Iraq. The president, as you know, ignored the deteriorating situation in Iraq and in Syria for too long. We found ourselves in this situation. So I think by going through this process with Congress, we can hopefully end up with a strategy that makes more sense.
Well, it's amazing. At the 2014 address, the word ISIS didn't exist in anyone's lexicon, and we just find ourselves in such a deteriorated situation since then, as you pointed out. Senator Portman, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks for having me on again. Take care.